In the early morning hours, two figures leave a house on a quiet street in Prestatyn, Wales, UK. There is no one else around, but there are cameras watching their every move. One person walks ahead, and the second, needing to use a crutch to walk, follows a few steps behind. If you saw this in real time, you probably wouldn't stop, because outside of the early hour, it was all pretty normal. Apart from, that is, one detail that will haunt you as you lay down to sleep tonight. The person walking behind is wearing a balaclava at 3:19 AM on a residential street. There's no visible struggle between the two of them, by the way, just an odd couple taking a very early morning walk. I guess so far we could convince ourselves that this was totally normal, but only one of these people would ever make it home again. So the question is, what happened on that walk? What led to a moment of madness? And which one of them made it home? In this video, I will share with you real CCTV of the incident, body cam footage of the arrest, horrifying crime scene photos, disturbing Discord messages from the perpetrator, and 5 facts that really make me question humanity. Let's dive in. By the way, this is Dark Case and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, so make sure that you're subscribed right now to be a part of the Dark Case family. I'm going to make this really quick so you don't get bored, or at least I'm going to try to, but automated AI content is absolutely flooding this platform right now. That means that human creators like me, and yes, I am a human, are struggling to be seen. So please do consider becoming a channel member in order to help me to keep this show on the road past the summer. It would be such a massive help to me right now. Currently 230 of you are channel members, which is absolutely incredible, and I really can't thank you all enough. I've set myself a target for 250 members by the end of April, but of course there's no pressure. Now for today's silly little question. Would you rather have $10,000 right now or $1 million, but it will only be deposited into your account exactly 37 years from today? And know before you say it can't be transferred to your kids or to anyone else. Let me know your answer down in the comments. And now, on with the video. Quick warning though, this story is seriously, well, let's find out together. To really get what happened on that walk, we have to go back quite a long way, because by the time they stepped outside, an ordeal had already been going on for several hours. Inside the house on Coniston Drive, Angela Shellis, 45 years old, was in her bedroom. She was already dealing with a knee injury at the time, and she was relying on a crutch to move around. So she was physically pretty vulnerable. It was around 11 PM when this situation began to unfold. A man entered her room, taking her by surprise, and he then subjected her to a torturous attack. And this situation, it didn't last just minutes. It lasted for approximately 4 hours. Just think about that for a second. 4 hours, half a working day. It's almost unthinkable. This was not a case of a brief loss of control. This was a sustained period of time, a period where Angela was trapped inside one room. To make matters worse, a hammer was involved. Like an actual nightmare was unfolding here. Angela was prevented from leaving. Pressure was applied to her neck and then released. She asked for help, begged for help more than once. She asked for emergency services to be called, but of course, that did not happen. To make things somehow even darker, the whole thing was being recorded. At some point during those hours, the perpetrator began using a dictaphone. He recorded parts of the night as it unfolded. He was capturing his handiwork in real time. On that recording, Angela can be heard asking for help. But just to give you an idea of how harrowing those recordings are, they've been described as being too distressing to even be played in court during the later trial. It's worth pointing out something important about the timeline that was unfolding in that room. because understanding the timeline makes everything worse. There were multiple points during those 4 hours where this could have stopped, where a different decision could have been made, but it wasn't, and instead, just after 3 a.m., the night, or early morning as it now was, changed direction. The perpetrator told Angela that they were going to leave the house. The explanation was simple and cruel. The story was that they were going to get help, medical help for Angela, the same thing that she'd been asking for hours. So at that point, she agreed to go. Anything outside of being held captive in her room probably seemed like a positive. But before the two of them stepped outside, there was another disturbing escalation. Angela herself, the victim, was made to wear a balaclava. There is no practical reason given for this, but it's definitely disturbing. Perhaps the perpetrator couldn't bear to look at Angela anymore. What this did mean though is when they left the house, Angela's identity was hidden. At 3:19 a.m, CCTV captured the two of them walking out together, with Angela following closely behind. And at this point still, it all could have been resolved, and everyone could have returned to a normal life. But instead, they walked out into the early hours, and then, well, let's find out. Now, about that dictaphone recording, it shows that this whole thing was not unfolding spontaneously, as well as recording Angela begging for help. The perpetrator had also recorded himself speaking before the incident. In those recordings, he talked about what he intended to do. So now, evidentially, we have 2 points in time. We have the before and the during, both documented in horrifying detail. There's something different about the dictaphone evidence to what we normally see. In this instant, it captures the move from intent to action in pretty much real time. This means that there's very little left to interpret here. By the time they left the house, we know that there was a plan, and that it was now in motion. Cameras picked up part of the route, and yes, there were parts of the journey missing, but there was enough to establish a real picture of what was going on. At one point, both figures approached a railway crossing, and they simply crossed it without stopping. This makes it seem like they knew exactly where they were going. I mean, I wouldn't cross railway lines in the dark, unless I knew the area and the timings well. It's worth noting that the perpetrator was carrying a rucksack, and inside it was the same hammer that had already been used earlier on in the night. And the fact that he has this hammer changes how I look at this walk. Far from going out in search of help, it was simply a continuation of what had already been happening. And the fact that the hammer was there with them on this journey, that is a foreboding fact. So Angela followed behind the man, the bag, the hammer, still wearing the balaclava. There were no visible attempts to get attention, and remember, Angela believed that she was going to get help for herself. It was also early enough that most people were still asleep, and late enough that the streets were empty. So really, there was nobody to help. Eventually, the route led towards Morfa Nature Reserve, an open space, dark and quiet, and at that time of the morning, it was almost completely, and I mean totally, isolated. Their walk ended at a bench inside the reserve. There, Angela was told to sit down. The man's control continued right up to the final moment. He then removed that hammer from his bag, and blows then rained down, over and over again. These blunt strikes would end Angela's time on this earth. This act alone seems almost unfathomable to us, hopefully, but to the man, he was still not finished. After the attack, Angela's body was moved. It was dragged away from the bench, into an area of undergrowth near a footpath. This is an aerial picture that shows the route and the marks left behind. The trail is over 100 meters long, marked in Angela's red DNA. The man then left the scene and returned back to Angela's house. CCTV captured him arriving back at around 5:35 a.m. But this was not the end of his movements. At approximately 6:25 a.m, the man then went back to the nature reserve. This time though, he was believed to be carrying some cleaning materials. But by now, something big had changed. The once isolated and deserted path was no longer empty. People had started to arrive, dog walkers, early morning runners, and this fact means that the man was interrupted, and the next steps of his plan were stopped before they started. His planned cleanup did not and could not happen. The 100-meter-long red trail remained. The crime scene was therefore left intact. And that changes pretty much everything going forwards, because instead of a cleaned-up crime scene, police would later arrive at a scene that still held the original evidence in its original state. So, whoever the perpetrator was, it seems like they were in big trouble. Well, so far we've covered everything that happened in the physical world. There was another version of this case unfolding at the same time. I'm talking about online. It's that darned digital footprint. Before anything happened inside Angela's house at night, Tristan Roberts was already active on Discord, and he was active across multiple accounts. When I say multiple, I mean multiple. There were around 16 in total. Some of his accounts were banned, but when he was banned, he would just open a new account anyway. This whole banning thing matters too, because I don't think it's easy to get banned from Discord, so Tristan must have been saying some pretty egregious things. The repeated bans also show that he was continuing to say the same bad things over and over, so we can guess that he wasn't getting better in his mindset, and instead he was going further off the deep end. I actually have some of the things that he said on Discord. Here's one. But yeah, I do hate girls. Are you okay with that? Girls/women. I also don't trust them. On its own, that's not a crime, but it is a starting point for how he felt. Because from there, his opinions seem to become more focused, more specific, and more personal. Then comes this. I like him, haha, Dexter, he's like me. But I wanted peace, you know, and I'll end anyone who tries to take it from me. Now that's not just simply frustration. That's someone openly identifying himself with a fictional character that is just known, defined by his violence. And Tristan is voluntarily placing himself in that role. At the same time, there are references to weapons. He says, it's really good quality. I could chop a bear apart with this. It's gonna be like some American Psycho, bleep, ha ha. Still, you arguably could miss it, just. People do say extreme things online all the time. But here's the problem. This escalates more and more until he says something truly disturbing like, to be honest with you, I nearly traumatized myself today by putting my shoes on at like midnight when she was sleeping and having the hammer in my hand. So now he is already saying something that really relates to what we have already learnt in this video. And then his language moves on again from consideration to seeming certainty. Don't worry, she is gonna just vanish off the earth. I already tried everything else. Now it's time. And alongside these messages, there were also searches made on his devices, allegedly using an AI chatbot, where he was looking for methods, ways to cause harm, ways to avoid detection in his crimes. So by the time the actions of the night began, there was already a damning and terrifying digital footprint in place. However, Tristan finds a way to keep on getting worse. After returning to Angela's house, after her time on this earth had come to a close, after everything had happened at the reserve, Tristan went back online and posted again. So you can see how I feel after killing her, right? That is pretty close to an admission, documented and timestamped. And at the same time, he really does keep getting lower. He now uses Angela's phone, and he messages her son Ethan pretending to be her, sending just normal messages with no indication that anything was wrong. This action creates an important delay. Ethan of course assumed that his mother was still alive to send the messages, but this only worked for a while because eventually, reality does catch up with the message. And when it does, the ties between what was said online and what actually happened in real life, they become impossible to ignore. So let's take a step back and see what we already have lining up. We have that digital evidence. It is a timeline. It shows hostility towards women. It shows identification of a victim. It's preparation, it's intent, and then there's even confirmation after the act. As digital footprints go, they don't get much more tied up in a bow than this one. However, there is one more truly disturbing twist in this story that makes this whole thing so much worse. On the morning of October the 24th, the crime scene had now changed. The nature reserve was no longer quiet. It was now fully active, even more busy than normal. This is because a member of the public going for a walk saw something in the undergrowth. It was Angela, motionless and cold. Emergency services were called and police arrived and secured the scene. Almost immediately, there were indicators that this was not an accident. They noticed the blaringly obvious 100-meter trail of red DNA. It led from the bench to where Angela had been left. There was also evidence scattered around. It all showed where the incident had begun and also where it ended, where Angela was. Nearby, several items were recovered: a crutch, gloves, and a balaclava that matched what Angela had been made to wear when leaving her house. At that moment, though, there was still a problem. The victim had not yet been identified. Remember, at this time, not even son Ethan knew that his mother was no longer with us. There was no immediate confirmation of who Angela was. She was just an unnamed victim. And initially that slowed everything down because without identification, there is no true starting point. But at the same time, running alongside, something else was already happening. Away from the scene in a nature reserve, Angela's family had started raising concerns. Angela had not returned home, and that was not normal. When loved ones spoke to the police, one detail was mentioned. At the time, Angela still needed to use a crutch to walk. That detail travelled back to the scene, and it matched up to what had been found. So those two separate threads, the troves of physical evidence and the family's concern, they all meet up at one point, and that is Angela Shellis. Once that identification was confirmed, the investigation shifted immediately, because now there was another location connected to her, that being her home, and the people inside it. Later that same day at approximately 1:20 p.m, police attended the address on Coniston Drive. There, Tristan Roberts was arrested. The focus was no longer on who had done this, but on how to connect all the dots. And, you see, there's one more thing. Tristan Roberts was the 18-year-old son of Angela Shellis. He had done all of this to his mum.
And then face the wall. Yes, please, drop the bottle. Okay, so...
I'm just going to put you in handcuffs for now, okay?
Okay.
Have you got anything on you?
No. And I detained or arrested.
You okay?
Yeah.
No more details of the body and things.
Yeah, all in order at the moment. Tristan came to the door and he came out. So we'll wait for other officers to get here before we go into the address.
After his arrest, Tristan Roberts was interviewed over a period of 4 days. There were 9 separate interviews. Each one was an opportunity to respond to the evidence. But each time, the answer was the same.
That plastic bag that you've just seen in those photographs, is that the same is that the same plastic bag that you took out with you on the early hours of Friday the 24th of October?
No comment.
When we've just seen you in that CCTV footage?
No comment.
No comment, no comment, no comment. Now, on its own, that might not seem unusual. It is a legal right in the UK, and I think most solicitors will just tell you to say it. But in this case, it creates a contrast, because while nothing was being said in that interview room, plenty of evidence was already speaking for him. CCTV had placed him leaving the house at 3:19 a.m. and then returning alone at 5:35 a.m. The timings had been established. The dictaphone had recorded parts of the night in real time. These included Mother Angela asking for help. There were the online messages that had documented intents before the incident, and it also referenced what he had done afterwards. Items recovered from the scene matched what had been carried away from the house, and forensic evidence linked those items back to Angela. The case did not depend on what Tristan said. It could be built on what was left behind, and by the time the interviews were complete, the foundations of the case were already solidly in place. Long before the night of October the 23rd, there had been signs that something was wrong. And they weren't subtle signs either. They weren't things that only make sense in hindsight. There were clear concerns that were being raised by people close to the situation. Angela had even written notes expressing fear for her safety. And one of these notes is particularly interesting because it matches up to the Discord message that Tristan sent when he said he got up and put his shoes on and was holding the hammer. That night, Angela wrote, "Oh my God, I did not sleep well at all. And Tristan kept coming into my room too. Why? Am I safe in my room tonight?" She was already extremely concerned about what might happen inside her home. At the same time, family members have recognised changes in Tristan's behaviour. There was escalation and aggression. They were also aware that he had bought a sharp implement and the hammer that was eventually used. Overall, there was a pattern that was becoming harder to manage. And in fact, this did not go unaddressed. Angela had reached out for help. She had contacted services. She had tried to find a way to stabilise the situation. So really, this is the key point. The risk had been identified. Angela was clearly worried, scared even of her own son. This wasn't one of those situations where warning signs only become clear after the fact. They were already there, already recognised, already documented. But by the night of October the 23rd, nothing had really changed and no help had been received. So I guess this offers a difficult question. At what point does a situation move beyond concern or fears and into something that requires immediate intervention? Because in this case, that point had already been reached clearly. And I mean, that's an understatement. Tristan Roberts was charged with murder on October the 28th, 2025. Over the following months, the timeline that had been built from the evidence, from the recorded movements and the digital records was now being examined in detail. The legal process trundled on until the 5th of February 2026. At this point, Tristan entered a guilty plea. This means that Angela's loved ones would not be subjected to a full trial. Sentencing took place on the 25th of March 2026 at Mould Crown Court. There, the focus shifted from interpreting just how bad what happened was to the level of planning involved, the duration of the incident inside the house, the recording of the incident seemingly for prosperity, and the vulnerability of Angela due to her injury. Each of these elements mattered, and together they painted a dark, dark picture. The defence raised mental health as a factor in the case. Tristan did have ADHD and autism, and both of those were considered. But the conclusion was clear. Tristan understood his actions. Tristan had control over his actions. And the judge described the case in summary as involving significant premeditation. This wasn't something that began and ended in a single moment. It was something that developed and continued to grow until it exploded in this way. The judge told the court, this was a planned and sustained attack, and the court found that what happened was not brief. The judge said that this was a prolonged and deeply distressing period of violence. When it came to sentencing, the court considered not just what happened, but for how long it continued, and how many chances there were to stop it. The judge made that one final point very clearly, saying, "You had multiple opportunities to stop, but at no point did you." Based on that, the sentence was delivered: life imprisonment. Tristan received life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 22 years and 6 months. Please do share your thoughts on this case down below. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.